I want my money. I want my money. I want my money. That's what I want. I want my money. I want my money. I want my money. That's what I want.
Money has certainly been with us for a long time, but it has not always been associated with freedom. Ancient peoples were not immune to what money could buy, yet it seems that entire cultures searched for freedom in a very different way. For them, freedom revolved more around the worship of their gods. Most civilizations had an unshakable belief in life after death. They believed that the sacrifice of animals, and even of human beings, would somehow buy them freedom from the wrath of their gods. The search for true freedom takes us to one of the most unique and intriguing locations in the world.
Petra, the lost city of mysteries. On top of this mountain, the Nabatean inhabitants sacrificed animals, some say even humans, to appease their angry gods.
Petra is located in the modern nation of Jordan. The capital, Amman, is a modern metropolis built in the valley below the ancient city.
From around 300 BC, Petra was inhabited by the Nabateans, an Arabic tribe that initially survived by raiding camel trains, but who soon perfected an easier lifestyle.
The important thing about Petra was that it was on the crossroads of the trade routes from Arabia to Damascus, Egypt and so forth. And so the Nabateans capitalised on this and they charged everyone taxes to pass through. And that was their source of income. It became a fabulously wealthy city.
The only way into Petra is through this 2-kilometre dry watercourse which the locals call the Seek. At times the walls narrow to only a few metres wide, while the cliffs soar to over 100 metres high.
Cut into the side of the cliff are the remains of a water channel carved by the Nabateans. It once brought water into the city from Moses' spring outside. Framed by the mouth of the Seek is El Kazna, the Traveller's Temple. It's one of the world's most photographed buildings. The Greek-style temple honoured the Egyptian goddess Isis. It may also have been a mausoleum for the burial of a Nabatean king. The Arabs named it El Kazna, meaning the treasury, in the mistaken belief that the urn contained gold. The Nabateans believed that the soul departed from the body and continued to live after death. Therefore, it should continue to be fed and clothed by its living descendants. That's why there's so many tombs at Petra.
Well, some of these tombs are really spectacular, you know, carved out of the solid rock and with beautiful facades giving it the appearance of a temple. So they went to a lot of trouble. They certainly must have had a belief in the afterlife.
The Romans invaded Petra in 106 AD and made it a province of the Roman Empire. This road, built from that period, runs across the valley floor. It was once lined with temples, palaces, shops and houses.
Petra faded out. After the Nabatean occupation came the Romans, and then came Christianity, then came the Arabic occupation, but little by little it lost its importance. The trade routes changed, they no longer went through Petra, and after that it just lapsed into silence.
It was the Swiss explorer John Burckhardt who rediscovered Petra. In 1812, he was travelling through the Middle East, disguised as an Arab sheikh. Gaining the trust of the tribesmen, he heard about the secret gorge leading through to the city of rock. He was determined to see it.
Being a professed Muslim, he said he wanted to sacrifice a goat to Aaron's tomb. And so the guide agreed to that and led him into this, what is known as the Seek. You know, it's a sort of a split in the rock. And they went through this Seek. It's about a mile long, you know, more than a kilometre in length. And when they got to the end, it bursts on your view, you know, this magnificent rock-cut tomb or temple known as El Ghazna. And it's a spectacular sight, and it took his breath away. And then when he went into the valley, he saw these other tombs and temples, whatever they are, and all this spectacular coloured sandstone. And he was so overwhelmed that obviously the guide could see that he was more interested in that than sacrificing his goat, and he became suspicious and threatened to kill him. So Burckhardt hastily sacrificed his goat and came out again, and to tell the astonished world of this amazing discovery he'd made. Petra was found.
But Petra still had some surprises in store. About an hour's climb up a side valley was the largest of Petra's monuments.
Locals call this temple the monastery. Half the mountain has been cut away to accommodate this huge building.
The facade is some 50 metres high and 45 metres wide. And the door is a staggering 9 metres high. Little did Burckhardt realise that this place was the backdrop to something truly bizarre. Out of this mountain fortress rise the stairs to the high place and the altar of sun worship. The priests of Petra selected a sacrifice, especially in times of need, and offered it to the sun.
The sacrifice was brought here before sunrise. At the top are these two cultic pillars. They're ancient fertility symbols. Incredibly, they weren't simply placed here. Instead, you can see that the mountain was cut away from around them.
These pillars were over 7 metres high. One represented the Nabatean mother goddess Al-Azza, while the other represented her son Dushara. Mother and son worship was very common in the ancient world. Presumably, the shadows cast by the rising sun determined the hour of the sacrifice.
The sacrifice was first bathed in the pool containing holy water. The water symbolised the cleansing from evil and impurity.
The priests took their knives and with cries and magical chants slew the victim on a low bench.
The body was carried to a nearby altar of sacrifice. Then, drink offerings and blood were poured out into this circular basin as an offering to the angry gods.
Rocks were splashed with the blood of the innocent victim in an attempt to show that justice had been carried out. It was hoped that this would satisfy the angry gods.
The Nabateans believed that if one person died on behalf of the whole tribe, the whole community's sins could be cancelled. Because they believed in life after death. The sacrifice of the victim was a reenactment of that which all the priests and people long for, release into a new world beyond. A resurrection from the death into the shadowy realm of the spirits. For thousands of years, the ancient city of Ur was lost. Then in 1854, the British government instructed its consul in Basra to dig up ancient treasures for display at the British Museum. He set off for a pile of bricks and rubble, which the locals called Tel el Makaya.
Now it's called that because it was a mountain of bricks and they were stuck together with bitumen. That's why it's called Tel el Makara, which means mound of pitch. And here's one of the bricks, look, or a portion of it anyway. You see, it's a solid, they're beautifully made, they're strong as anything. And they were stuck together with this bitumen. So it was called a mound of pitch. Well, he was looking for treasure. He set his men to work on the top of this ziggurat or temple tower, you see, and just simply heaved the wall off. You know, he thought he'd find something sooner or later. But what he did find were 4 cylinders, clay cylinders with cuneiform writing on it. And he sent them back to the British Museum and said, sorry, old chaps, you know, this is all I can find. And of course the museum was a bit disgusted because cuneiform could hardly be read in those days. So they just stuffed them into a back room and left them there. And it wasn't until much later that somebody did a bit of research and read the cuneiform. And here was this record of Ur Nammu, who had rebuilt the ziggurat. And it suddenly occurred to them, Ur Nammu. Was his name Nammu? That's the name of the king, and Ur is the name of the city. Now, that was the first time that Ur was identified. You see, prior to that, it was thought it was just a biblical fiction.
Ur is located in southern Mesopotamia, some 320 kilometres south of Baghdad. In its heyday, Ur was the thriving capital of the Sumerians, an intelligent race with a rich culture.
The idea of the ancient Mesopotamian people was that you had to get as close to God as possible, and God's up there, so build a ziggurat or temple tower. And these were made of bricks. The core was made of sun-dried mud bricks, but the outside facing was made of very well-baked bricks. And they were stuck together with bitumen, which is the best mortar that you can possibly get. It really, you just can't prize it off. So they made these in 3 stages with this shrine on top. Now the ziggurat at Ur of the Chaldees in Mesopotamia was also coloured. They found traces of colour on it. The lowest stage was black, the next stage was blue, and the third stage was red. It must have been quite spectacular.
The critics claimed that Ur never existed, and that Abraham was only a myth. But the discovery of Ur lends further weight to the Bible's credibility.
Sir Leonard Woolley found no evidence of human sacrifice at the ziggurats, or, for that matter, anywhere in Ur of the Chaldees. But he did find evidence of a burial custom that almost fringed on that, and that was the kings were buried in tombs that were made of brick. And when they were interred there, then in front of this tomb, there was a large pit into which marched a number of people. There were servants, there were courtiers, there were musicians, there were bullock drivers. They all came down here, and Woolley found a bowl with a number of cups. And apparently what they did was to take a potion of poison and just lay down and died. There was no evidence of being killed or sacrificed. It was a voluntary act. In fact, Woolley says it was probably part of their contract when they signed up to work in the palace, that when the king died, they'd go with him. Now, to them, that was not a disaster. They had a firm belief in the afterlife. They really believed that, you know, this is the best way to go. And so they'd go with the king, and after all, they had cushy jobs in the palace, much better than working out in the fields in the afterlife. So there were these death pits, and anything up to 60 people voluntarily laid down their lives, and they just curled up and died there. And then, of course, the whole pit was filled in and buried.
The search for freedom leads us back to explore the ancient Israelites' worship practices, which had their origins south of Petra.
Mount Sinai and the monastery of St. Catherine. In the early centuries, Christian pilgrims and monks fled to this area to find peace and solitude. They were protected in this fortress-like town built by Emperor Justinian in the 6th century AD.
This is the traditional site where Moses drew water from the well for his father-in-law Jethro, and where he stood before the burning bush. Not far from here is the traditional site of Mount Sinai. It was there that God established a form of worship that would last for centuries. God thundered the principles of his character in the form of the Ten Commandments. Then, with his own finger, he wrote them on 2 stone tablets. At the base of the mountain is a broad plain where it's thought the Israelites camped for over a year.
God instructed Moses to build a portable temple here known as the sanctuary. This would establish an important system of worship and sacrifice that would last for centuries.
The sanctuary was intended to convey a deep spiritual meaning familiar to the culture of those times. For the Israelites, the sanctuary became a pathway to freedom. But the real significance of the Israelite worship in the sanctuary can only be appreciated by going back to the genesis of human existence. The ancient scriptures state that when Adam and Eve disobeyed God in the Garden of Eden, sin entered the world. But what was sin?
Self-centeredness, selfishness. That's what it is at base.
When Adam and Eve sinned, death was the unfortunate result. But not just for them. God looked upon the human race as a community, a family. Sin separated the entire human race from God. God didn't want this tragic result. He wanted humans to be truly free from the results of sin. So a plan was devised that would not only satisfy God's justice, but also demonstrate his love. Someone else would die so that the consequences of the broken relationship with God could be removed. To teach Adam and Eve and their descendants about this freedom, and to show the hideous nature of sin, God instructed them to kill a lamb when they wanted a pardon from sin. The sacrifice of the innocent lamb was an act of faith. In hindsight, we can see that it was pointing forward to the fact that one day God, as a human called Jesus, the metaphorical Lamb of God, would die for the sins of every human being. In Moses' time, the simple sacrifice of a lamb was expanded into the ritual of the sanctuary and its services. It was to be the means of instructing the people about freedom.
The sanctuary was something which the Israelites had in the wilderness as a central focus for their worship. So you had a large outer court, and then in the middle of that outer court you had a smaller rectangular tent. And that rectangle was divided into 2 parts. One part known as the holy place, and then the smaller part of that rectangle known as the most holy place. And there were a number of objects in each of those compartments which were very important for Israelite worship. In the most holy place you had what was known as the Ark of the Covenant, and this was really a wooden chest covered in gold, and inside that were the 10 Commandments. And the 10 Commandments was really a summary of the relationship between God and the Israelites. That was divided, that is, the most holy place was divided from the holy place by a veil or a curtain. And in the holy place you had an altar of incense on which incense was burned. You had a table of showbread on which loaves of bread were placed. And then you had a 7-branched candlestick. Outside, in the outer courtyard, you had an altar of burnt offering where many of the sacrifices were offered, together with a laver, which was an object for washings, ritual washings, which took place in connection with those sacrifices. A priest was somebody who officiated in various rituals. He acted really as a go-between between the worshipper and God. You might well be asked, well, why sacrifice? I mean, why does it take the death of animals to deal with sin? And the basic reason for that is that sin is something that's terrible. It isn't something that you can excuse. It isn't something which is explainable. It's something that has to be dealt with, and it is drastic. That's how serious sin is.
During the reign of King David, the Ark of the Covenant was brought to Jerusalem. His son Solomon built the temple on the summit of Mount Moriah. Today the site is occupied by the Dome of the Rock. The courtyards surrounding the holy place cover the original site of Solomon's temple. In the time of Jesus, the temple was completely rebuilt at Roman expense. In it, Jesus saw lambs being sacrificed. No wonder he said,
"Greater love has no man than this, to lay down his life for a friend. You are my friend, if you do whatever I command you."
Recent research suggests that the temple was built on the very summit of the mountain, on the bare rock now visible inside the mosque.
The temple was destroyed by the Romans in AD 70. All that is left today is the base of the retaining wall built by Herod. It supported the platform upon which the temple stood. Known today as the Western Wall, it's where Jews from all over the world come to pray.
Ironically, the Western Wall is really a reminder that the sacrificial system was made redundant by Jesus' crucifixion.
But God demonstrates his own love towards us, in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us.
It's a claim that millions over the last 2 millennia have demonstrated to be true by their changed lives. It must also be acknowledged that millions of misguided Christians use their power and influence to dominate and enslave those who believe differently from them. The freedom that Jesus bought for us was designed to repair the broken relationship between human beings, God and nature. Today, the world seems cut off from the source of life. The planet is dying for the want of freedom. The great tragedy is that millions choose to be slaves to violence, lust, greed, power, self-indulgence, vanity and pride. But it doesn't have to be so. Enslavement is not inevitable. We do have a choice as to how we can live. We can choose freedom. We don't need to climb a stairway to the sun to find freedom from guilt. Someone else has already climbed another hill and sacrificed himself for our sins. And he promises to deliver a world to come where there will be no more evil, no more guilt, and no more death. Now that is true freedom.